Here's Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you, talking all about the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets, of course, have a new head coach in Scott Arniel. To talk about that hire, we're pleased to welcome to the program someone who knows Scott Arniel very well. The head coach of the North Dakota Fighting Hawks, Brad Berry, joins us this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Brad, good morning. Welcome back to the program. How are things?
Yeah, good morning, fellas. Things are going great, and thanks for having me on today.
It's our pleasure to have you on. Brad, you played with Scott Arniel for all those years in Winnipeg. You coached with him for all those years with the Moose and with the Columbus Blue Jackets. When the news came out last Friday that he was officially getting hired as the Jets head coach, what was your reaction to that? Obviously, you're thrilled for your friend and everything else along those lines, but just sort of take us through your thoughts when that news officially happened last Friday.
Well, first of all, very excited for Scott. Obviously, well deserved, and I know he's built his body of work and his career over the last few years here, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of that through the Manitoba Moose, coaching with him for a few years, and then also in Columbus. But yeah, he's ready for the opportunity again here, and I know he's learned a lot and been around a lot of really good coaches and a lot of good organizations here to set him up for success. And the guys in Winnipeg do an amazing job there with Chipper and Zinger and the rest of the crew and Chevy and those guys. So a lot of familiarity. And I know he's pretty excited and pumped to be the next head coach there.
And Brad, I was going to ask you about Columbus, and one of those good coaches that he was around was yourself, right? you were an assistant coach with Scott in Columbus, and a lot of people, and obviously on this show we've talked a lot about the potential of Scott Arniel being named the head coach, and now obviously he has been officially named. And a lot of people point back to Columbus and they say, well, the record wasn't very good and everything like that. And what I've always said, about that is that that was first off, that was a younger team, but it was a team that I remember Rick Nash, obviously Vaclav Prospal, but it was a pretty top heavy team, right? Like you had quite a few young players there. I guess the question I wanted to ask you is, when you look back on those 2 years, what do you think Scott learned as a coach? Because he talked about that in his introductory press conference. And also, what did you learn as a coach? Because maybe if you can kind of blend those two together, because obviously you've gone on to a very successful career with the University of North Dakota. And now I think you're entering your 12th or 13th year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's a lot of great stuff, a lot of great questions there in what you said. But, I think the first thing is, experience. Nothing takes the place of being, there and doing it for the first time and getting that experience. And, when Scott and I were together in Manitoba with the Moose, we had some very successful seasons there in the mid 2000s. And it was the American League. And for me personally, joining him then, coming from college hockey, those were two very impactful years that I had. I learned a lot as far as on the pro coaching side. And, both Scott and I played in the NHL and the American League and the IHL, but to get that experience, it's non-replaceable. And then when you take that next step to the NHL, which is the highest level of hockey that you can get to, as a coach, there are things that you learn as you go. And, I think Scott was very prepared, but I think there were situations too where I think he'd have to admit that, going through them for the first time, how do you deal with them? And us as coaches and as players, when their adversity hits, sometimes you always go, well, what could I have done better? What could I have learned from it? And I tell you what, I got to hand it to Scott. It didn't take very long after Columbus to, go back to the American League in Chicago, and then obviously go to the Rangers and the Washington Capitals before he got back to Winnipeg, and be around unbelievable people. When you look at the guys that he ended up coaching with Peter Lavalette, with guys like Rick Bowness and guys like Alain Vigneault, you can do nothing but help to help you formulate a body of work to get your next opportunity. And here we are right now. So again, like I said, I think he's learned a lot from those days in Columbus, been around a lot of really good people, and I know he's going to have a lot of success going forward from all those experiences.
Brad, you touched on the time you guys spent in Manitoba with the Moose together, and that's part of what I wanted to touch on, was that importance of knowing, you both played in the AHL, the IHL, as did Scott later in his career, and then coached in that league. Just how important is it for a coach to have understanding of what those guys' mentality is, so when they call up, you can be empathetic to them and what they're going through and have a knowledge of that league at the NHL level?
Well, the American Hockey League, and again, I just brought it up a few minutes ago. Like, to me, that was very impactful and formative for my coaching career here. And getting to work with, obviously, God bless his soul, Rick Rippon and Alex Edler and Jason Jaffrey, and there are a ton of guys that came through our program that went up to the Vancouver Canucks, and you get to see kind of how those young men grow exponentially at their time in the American League, and then you see them finally go up, and some guys stay and some guys come back, and how you deal with all that. And I think communication is the biggest thing, is having conversations and being transparent, and being as communicative as you can. And again, I have a lot of respect for the American Hockey League, because I think there's not too many guys that don't go through that league to get to the NHL. There's a few elite players that don't touch the American Hockey League, but I'd say the majority does, and it's a very impactful stage, and not only for players but coaches as well.
Brad Barry, University of North Dakota Fighting Hawks head coach, is our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Now, Brad, Scott in his introductory press conference on Monday talked a lot about learning as a head coach and developing as a head coach. Everybody, in all walks of life, they have core tenets that they believe and that they take with them from job to job or circumstance to circumstance. How important is it for a head coach to sort of take those core tenets, but at the same time learn to develop additional ones or learn to build upon them with new experiences? And how much of a factor do you think that'll be for Scott Arniel to be successful behind the bench for the Winnipeg Jets?
Yeah, for sure. And I think our first time going from Manitoba to Columbus, there are situations that arise, and then how do you deal with them? And communication has to be the first and foremost part of being elite at that, and making sure that you cross every T and dot every I. And I firmly believe too that just making sure that you're on top of things from day to day. When things arise, you got to be communicative with not only your players but your staff, and then learn from it going forward here. So, at the end of the day, like I talked about earlier too, after he left Columbus, he was around some successful organizations. I remember going out and watching. I think they were playing the LA Kings in the finals, in the Stanley Cup finals, with the Rangers and LA at one time, and just kind of watching how things developed in the course of that series, and learning from some of the coaches that he was around. And I think patience is a big thing. Scott's a very passionate guy. He's a fiery guy sometimes, and I think even watching the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs with a guy like Chris Knobloch with the Edmonton Oilers, I mean, there's a very patient guy through all the ups and downs, and just making sure that you get through those ebbs and flows, and being even keel and being patient. And I think he's learned a lot about the patient side of the game as well.
Brad, I wanted to ask you about the past year, and I realized that you're more hyper focused on the University of North Dakota, but I'm sure that you were following your friend Scott Arniel when he took over for Rick Bowness, when Judy, of course, had the unfortunate health issues, and then he had to take over for Rick a little bit later in the season. But when Scott Arniel took over, I don't quote me on the record, because these guys know that I often misquote, but I want to say that Scott kept the Jets going at like a 9-2-2 clip. And his overall record was really good when he took over for head coach when Rick was away from the team. Like, how much stock do you put in that? Because I think that speaks to the continuity of this organization, right? The Jets had 110 points last year, and I think he did an amazing job. And you'd have to think that factored in big time to Chevy deciding to give Scott Arniel the head coach job with the Jets.
Well, yeah, you never know how it's going to go, but at the end of the day, when you got to be ready for that opportunity, whatever that looks like. And unfortunately, Rick being away on the health side of it, that was unfortunate, but it did give Scott an opportunity to come in and to help take over until Rick got back. But I just firmly believe that he was ready to do that, and I think it's a lot of times, like I just talked about drawing from the experiences of making sure that you're calm under pressure, knowing that the head guy is gone, and what are you going to do now to keep this ship going straight? And I know that Rick and Scott have a really tight relationship. Goes back a long ways to the old Jet days, to the Vancouver Canucks when we were in Manitoba, and V and Bones were in Vancouver, and having that relationship and being on the same page. And I think that's the key, is just making sure that you don't deviate from what you're doing, but now you got to make sure that you keep the rudder in the water, and you got to keep that ship going north, and you got to make sure that you're doing everything you can to help having success.
You know, Brad, one of the things you talk about is that continuity, and that's a theme that was talked about on the Monday presser when Chevy was talking about the players and the sentiment from the players in the exit meetings about having Scott Arniel. So in terms of votes of confidence, how important is that from a GM and from a coaching staff to say, you know, these players embraced playing under him and wanted to see him, if there was going to be a change, that he'd be given that opportunity?
Well, 100%, continuity is a big thing. And I watched the press conference here a few days ago too. And I really, like some of the things that were being said by Chevy and Arnie. And, one of the things that I picked up on too is the foundation of the program, in Winnipeg right now. Like, there's a strong foundation there. It's been built up, through, the last few years, and obviously Bones coming in, helping that out as well. And I think the last thing you want to do is, if you're having success, kind of maybe going on the outside and then bringing another message in, or bringing in something that changes that foundation. And, when things aren't going well, I think that's more likely to happen. But when you have a really strong foundation, and the seasons that they've had the last few years, and again, I think the ultimate goal, I know the ultimate goal is to win a Stanley Cup, but I think they're on the right track. And I think at the end of the day, of having the continuity of a coaching staff and guys have, played in Winnipeg, in that market, in the Canadian market, where there's a lot of pressure, and knowing what it takes is a huge deal. So I got to commend, the Jets, Chevy, Zinger, and Chipper for hiring Scott. And I do believe it's the right move.
The continuity is certainly important, Brad, but there's the transition from being the assistant head coach to the head coach. And it's something you've experienced back in 14-15, at the end of the 14-15 year at North Dakota. Dave Hackstall leaves. He goes and becomes the head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers. You take over and have been in that role ever since. So if Scott calls you up and says, Brad, what was the biggest difference in transitioning from assistant head coach to the head coach, what would you tell him? What advice would you give him regarding making that transition?
Well, we talk about that all the time. And I think, as the season progresses and things go, whether you're having success or whether you're going through adversity, be true to who you are. Be who you are. Do the things that have given you success in the past. And obviously, listening to the press conference with Scott, I thought he had a really good point about, as the game changes, you have to change as well. You have to make tweaks and changes to your coaching style, but being true to your inner self on who you are. And, like I said, at the end of the day, when I took over, I'm not Dave Hackstall, and I'm not Dean Blaze, the guy that was before him. I'm Brad Berry, and these are the things that I think I can bring to the table that's going to help our program here, and being true to yourself. And I think that's the same when I talk to Scott, is he's not Rick Bowness. And at the end of the day, obviously you have similar philosophies and mentalities, but you got to be Scott Arniel, and you got to be true to yourself, and with the mindset of making changes and adapting as the game of hockey goes on in the future.
Brad, you mentioned that you tuned into the Scott Arniel press conference, and we were talking about this during the first hour of the show. I'm not sure if you caught any of it. We also had Paulie Edmonds on, and we were talking about it. The Jets organization and Scott Arniel mentioned that there's going to be a more of a focus on analytics for the coaching staff. And we all thought that was pretty interesting because, as some coaches and some people in the hockey world embrace it more than others. What is your kind of overall take on that? I mean, because it seemed like to us, that's always refreshing to hear, that even if a coach isn't looking at, every single spreadsheet and every single number, the fact that they're going to try to embrace that a little bit more in their coaching philosophy and coaching technique is just refreshing to hear a guy like Scott Arniel talk about that.
Well, absolutely. It's a way of life right now. And, I know down here in North Dakota, there's so many software programs and different things that you can buy into or whatever. And we have 2 or 3 different sources. And for me, I think it's the way that right now that you're trying to accentuate or help your organization going forward. And, you can get pretty caught up into that, and you can maybe get pretty negative sometimes on what that looks like. but I think you gotta filter it to I guess your needs, what you're looking for. And I think those are the things that you want to do, is you want to keep doing the things you're doing well through the analytics, but it's kind of refreshing to know of some of the things maybe you miss as a coach through video that you need to work on, whether it's D-zone coverage or entries or exits or whatever that is, that these analytics just kind of jump out and pop out at you where you need to try to get better at. And I think that's the way it is right now. And again, if you have the tools and the capabilities, why not? I mean, at the end of the day, it's just going to help you.
Brad, I was reading in the Grand Forks Herald that you're going to be coaching against a guy named Bauer in a couple of years. So what's that like? What's that going to be like for you when your son is going up against you playing for St. Thomas?
Well, first of all, I'm proud of him for being who he is and standing on his own. Yeah, he's come a long way. He's playing in the USHL in Muskegon, and he's fortunate enough to get an opportunity to accept a scholarship at St. Thomas. And yeah, it's going to be a little awkward, I guess, a little bit at first. But at the end of the day, I know he really wanted to play here at North Dakota, but him and I, really close relationship, and just talking a little bit about what the dynamic looks like when you have a player in the locker room and your dad's the head coach, and what does that look like? And I, just talking through it, he understood, and he wanted to carve his own path, and he went through a recruiting process that was pretty patient. And at the end of the day, when he committed, the next day or the 2 days later, they were announced coming into our league. So I know his mother was excited. I know that he's going to be close to home, but I know that his mother's going to be cheering for him, and probably not North Dakota when we're playing against each other.
The mother's love is stronger than the bond between a husband and wife in that case. Yeah. Brad, we'll let you go on this last question. I have to ask it. I apologize for putting you on the spot. There's 2 vacancies behind the Winnipeg Jets bench.
Oh,
no, any
Brad
thoughts,
knew that was
interest?
coming, Drew. He knew it was coming.
I know he knew it was coming.
You know what? I would be honored and privileged to try maybe sometime again to be part of the Winnipeg Jets organization. But you know what, guys, I think Scott deserves to look outside, and I think that Scott deserves to hire maybe somebody that's been around the NHL game in most recent years to help him out. Again, I feel like I could help and do that. But you know what, guys, I feel like I'm the head coach of the 33rd NHL team here in Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Yeah.
We got Ingolstadt Arena, we got resources here, we got elite players coming through our program. I love what I'm doing, and I love the fact that I feel like I'm back in the American League again, helping these young guys try to get to your level. And again, feel privileged. But again, I never say no. But at the end of the day, I'm happy what I'm doing here for now.
I got one more. Sorry. Okay. And Drew did have to ask it because a lot of people saw that you were coming on the show, and a lot of people know that you were the assistant under Scott in Columbus. So
and Manitoba.
Yeah, apology and the Moose, of course. So apologies to Drew. But I wanted to ask you one question because I come down to Grand Forks every year. Shout out to our buddy Kyle Kozier and the Kozier family who live in Grand Forks. So I come to one UND at least game a year. Saw that Mac Swanson from Alaska won Junior Player of the Year. So just wanted to get your opinion on that because obviously UND has no shortage of good players like Jackson Blake's kid had a phenomenal season. But Mac Swanson, I mean, how excited are you for him to get on your team, and just overall I know that it's the summer and you're trying to enjoy the summer weather, but how excited are you already getting for next year and kind of the incoming freshman crop?
It's funny because, when the season ends and, we had a really good, strong season here, and we didn't get to the final game of the college hockey season, but, obviously we're going to be trying to do that next year. But having a guy like Mac Swanson, that was the USHL Player of the Year, and I think you just got named the National Junior Player of the Year in the U.S. here is phenomenal. A great young player, guy that competes extremely hard as ultra high skill level. He's going to help our group immensely here, and you always wonder how that's going to happen right away, playing against guys that are 21, 22, 23 years old here in college hockey. But you know what? He's done it for 2 years at the USHL level. We're excited. There's a couple other guys that are going to be draft picks this year, high end. Sasha Beauvert from Muskegon, Michigan. He's from Quebec, coming in our group. He's an elite player. And EJ Emery, a defenseman at the National Development Program. We've got some high end kids coming in, and we've got a lot of really good returning players as well here. So it should be an exciting year for us.
It absolutely will be. It's a great program you're running there in Grand Forks, Brad.
Absolutely.
We always appreciate your time and insight. Thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the summer, and we look forward to catching up with you again.
Thanks again. Very grateful and privileged to be on. And again, there's an open invite for all you to come down. If you guys ever want to come down and watch a game or be around, we'd love to have you host you down here. So
I can assure you, we will take you up on that offer, and then you will.
We'll see you at Caribou
regret it.
Coffee, Brad, or maybe Chick-fil-A.
There you go.
Thanks, Brad.
Go Jets.
Take care.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, man.